This topic, the mixed methods approach to research, including triangulation and methodological pluralism. The mixed methods approach. The mixed methods approach to research, including triangulation and methodological pluralism. This happens to be on page number 65 from our Cambridge endorsed book. Before we get started with this, what I said was I'd want everyone to write down this question, and the question over here is: all research methods have strengths, but they're most effective when combined together. What we're talking about is all research methods having their own strengths, but they are most effective when they are combined together, right? Now, I hope everyone has understood this, right? Every research method that we have spoken about so far, we have spoken about questionnaires, we've spoken about interviews, we've spoken about observation, we've spoken about different types of questionnaires, different type of observations, different type of interviews. They all have their own strengths and limitations, right? Let's focus on strengths for now, but even when we talk about their strengths, they would be most effective if they are to be combined together. This is what we expected to evaluate, right? Now, keeping this in mind, getting started with this, the mixed methods approach to research, including triangulation and methodological pluralism. Now, what exactly is methodological pluralism? Everyone knows what the word plural means. Plural means more than one, right? When we talk about methodological pluralism, we are throwing an idea here that instead of using one particular research method, how about we use more than one methods? I mean, why is it that the school of thought that supports the idea of using observation wants to just stick to observation? Instead of just sticking to observation, we can also use a questionnaire. I mean, there's a possibility that you distribute questionnaires, collect data through questionnaires, and after that, you get to observe the same individuals, the same group that you want to conduct your research on, right? So, the mixed methods approach, we're talking about using more than one methods under the heading methodological pluralism. Now, what exactly is methodological pluralism? When we talk about methodological pluralism, it has to do with the idea that we should use more than one methods to conduct our research. Okay. अब the question is why? Why is it that we're expected to, or why is it that we're even talking about using more than one methods to collect data to conduct our research? Do you know what? These different research methods that we talk about, they all have their strengths, but at the same time they have their own limitations, they have their own flaws as well. तो जहाँ पे हमारे पास इन research methods की strengths है, वहाँ पे इनके flaws भी हैं. तो the possibility that the flaws that are there in one method could possibly be compensated with the strengths of another, right? Now there's a possibility that when you're conducting a research or when you're collecting your data through questionnaires, उसके अंदर जो भी flaws होंगे उन flaws को probably आप compensate कर सकते हो किसी और research method को इस्तेमाल करके, right? तो methodological pluralism is again the idea that more than one method should be used to collect data. Now, how is it that the term methodological pluralism is different from the term triangulation? When we talk about this term triangulation, or as we use this term triangulation over here, we're referring to putting that idea to practice. We're talking about putting that idea to practice. Or, in other words, the idea that more than one research method should be used, actually putting it to use, actually while conducting a research. Let's just say there's a sociologist, a sociological research worker, Mr. XYZ. If Mr. XYZ is conducting a research, actually putting this idea to use, in reality, using more than one methods to be able to collect data is triangulation. This idea of triangulation was put forward by Norman Denzin, right? Norman Denzin was a person who came up with this idea about using more than one methods while collecting sociological research. If you still don't get this, let me put it in a more simplistic manner. You know what? हमारा ये मानना कि नमाज पढ़नी चाहिए, 5 वक्त नमाज हर बंदे को पढ़नी चाहिए, ठीक है, ये एक आइडिया है, ये एक सोच है। लेकिन हमारा ये बिलीव करना कि हमें 5 वक्त नमाज पढ़नी चाहिए और हमें एक्चुअली 5 वक्त नमाज जा जाके हम पढ़ें, उन दोनों में अलग अलग चीज़ें, देयर इज अ डिफरेंस बिटवीन what you think should be done and what you actually do. Likewise, methodological pluralism has to do with you believing that more than one method should be used. However, triangulation is actually putting that to use, actually using more than one methods while conducting your research. Are we clear there?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Everyone?
Yes, sir.
Am I
Yes,
clear
sir.
to everyone? Moving on, taking it a step ahead, many research projects involve more than one method. This is referred to as methodological pluralism. This can include combining methods like that produce quantitative data and qualitative data. For example, I could talk about using a close-ended questionnaire to collect data and at the same time collecting data through an observation. Combining methods that produce both quantitative and qualitative data, right? Now, we see, I mean, you all see positivism and interpretivism written over here, but this I'd try to give you all a bit of an idea about what they are. And then in the next class, inshallah, when we're done with this, we discuss all of this in detail, right? Now, this can include combining methods that produce quantitative and qualitative data. Moving on, let's have a look at this key term. Even this says methodological pluralism is combining research methodologies in ways that allow each to compensate the others to improve research reliability and validity, right? I'm assuming everyone knows what reliability and validity is. Reliability is when you conduct a research more than once and you come up with the same conclusion. However, validity is when you're actually figuring out what you intend to figure out, right? आपका रिसर्च का पर्पस क्या है, क्या आप जो आप क्लेम कर रहे हो क्या आप फिगर आउट करोगे, क्या आपकी रिसर्च इस तरीके से डिजाइंड है कि वाकई आप वो चीज़ को फिगर आउट कर पाओ, वो हमें वैलिडिटी से पता चलता है, ठीक है। रिलायबिलिटी से क्या पता चलता है, एक से ज़्यादा दफ़ा अपनी रिसर्च कंडक्ट करना और सेम कंक्लूजन पे आना। मूविंग ऑन, researchers often use methodological pluralism because different research methods have different strengths and weaknesses. We've discussed this. For instance, questionnaires may produce reliable data. Now, why is it? Now, remember, we're using the term may over here, right? I come across students who be like, sir, but questionnaires are reliable and not valid. I mean, says who? We need to keep in mind, we're studying sociology. There's always a gray area. Hence, we're using the word may over here. Questionnaires may produce reliable data. Now, why is it that people think, or many sociological researchers think, questionnaires provide us, or questionnaires produce more of reliable data and less of valid data? Because you know what? Questionnaires, let's just stick to the example that I'd given earlier. Let's talk about a close-ended questionnaire, right? A close-ended questionnaire would probably be producing quantitative data, and when it's producing quantitative data की ये खास बात है कि देर आर मोर चांसेस कि हम उससे एक से ज़्यादा दफ़ा रिसर्च कंडक्ट करेंगे तो हमारा रिसर्च का कंक्लूजन सेम आएगा, right? What I'm saying is, when you talk about a questionnaire, when we refer to a questionnaire being more reliable than valid, the idea over here is that because questionnaires help us produce quantitative data, especially when you're talking about a close-ended questionnaire over here, right? Because they help us produce more of quantitative data. This quantitative data is always easier when it comes to replication, right? A very simple example, I have two pens over here, right? I have two pens, I have more actually, I have three pens over here, right? Now, if I, regardless of the amount of time I count them, they would always be three, because it's numeric data: 1, 2, and 3. 1, 2, and 3. 1, 2, and 3. I do it 10 times, I'd get the same answer. So questionnaires की जब हम बात करते हैं, the idea over here is, because questionnaires, especially close-ended questionnaires, help us gather quantitative data, the data that can be represented through numbers, there are more chances of our findings being reliable. Now, At the same time, why is it that people claim that the data that is found or collected through questionnaires might be low in validity? Because you know what? We're asking people probably about their opinion. We're probably asking people about what they went through. A questionnaire is an example of a self report measure. When we talk about a questionnaire being a self report measure, आप खुद पार्टिसिपेंट से पूछ रहे हो उनका किसी चीज के बारे में क्या ख्याल है. If someone asks me, नमाज़ें पढ़नी चाहिए, I'd be like, yes, ज़रूर पढ़नी चाहिए. The question is, do I actually do what I'm saying I'm doing? Right? So, you cannot really be sure about the responses that you get from a questionnaire. You're putting people into an artificial situation. You know, someone asking me about the amount of times I pray. I mean, why me? We could talk about anyone else, right? Someone asking someone else about the amount of times they pray compared to you actually going and seeing if they're praying, they're two different things. So, the assumption over here is कि questionnaires validity में लो इसलिए होते हैं क्योंकि questionnaires के थ्रू हमारे पास qualitative data के chances बहुत ज़्यादा कम होते हैं. Qualitative data. Get it?
Yes, sir.
Right? Now, likewise, over here we spoke about a questionnaire. Moving on, if we compare that with a covert participant observation, right? Now, while the reverse may be true for covert participant observation, in other words, covert participant observation की probably reliability would be low and its validity might be high. I'm using the word might, right? It might be high. Okay. Now, when you talk about a covert participant observation, what exactly is a covert participant observation? A covert participant observation is when the researcher does not disclose his or her own identity, right? Remember, the word covert comes from the word cover. The idea over here is that the researcher might not disclose his identity. The researcher might keep his or her identity undercover or hidden, right? So, when you're observing someone, when you're a participant observer, you being a participant observer, in other words, means you're actually participating in the activities that that particular group is involved in, right? But at the same time, you're making a point that your identity is not disclosed. You're participating in their group's activities, but they think you're amongst them even when you're not. You're a covert observer. In that case आपकी वैलिडिटी probably high हो सकती है, because क्योंकि उनको लगता है आप उन्हीं में से हैं, तो आपका बिहेवियर, आपके आपके सामने जो भी उनका बिहेवियर हो गया होगा, that might be pretty natural, that might be pretty close to how their behavior in reality is like, right? And this is one reason why we can say that when you talk about a covert participant observation, its validity might be high. And when we talk about its reliability being low, reliability low, देखो एक दफा आपने किसी को एक बिहेवियर करते हुए देख लिया, what guarantee do you have? How do you think you can be certain that that same behavior can be repeated again? I mean, I don't think so. It doesn't really make much sense to me. एक दफा अगर एक बिहेवियर हो गया तो उसके दोबारा होने के चांसेस बहुत ज्यादा कम है. मतलब कम है या नहीं है, मतलब it's might happen, might not happen, right? Are we clear
Yes,
about
sir.
both of these? We spoke about a questionnaire, a data collection method, and a covert participant observation, a data collection method. Again, over here we spoke about reliability being high, validity being low. In this case, we spoke about reliability being low, validity being high. You know, this very clearly demonstrates how all of these research methods that we discuss, they have their own flaws. And when all of these research methods, they have their own flaws, you could probably compensate the flaw of one research method with the strength of another. Do we get this?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Moving on. Rather than approaching research methodology from the perspective of a design problem, let me use this highlighter. I think it's visible. Yeah. Okay. It is readable. Let me make it straight. Yeah. So, Now, rather than approaching research methodology from the perspective of a design problem, how to test a hypothesis or answer a research question, that is interpretivism, we can approach it from a methodological perspective. Now, let me give you a tiny little idea about positivism and interpretivism over here, and we'd study about this in detail in the next class, which is again very important. I tell you, I just showed you a 26-mark question that you could possibly get on triangulation. We have gotten a question like this earlier. This was in the past papers. And you know what, even if it's not there, we typically keep on getting questions like any question. What about a question that says evaluate the view that unstructured interviews are high in validity. No, unstructured interviews being high in validity compensates for its flaws, right? Or anything along these lines, right? The point that I'm trying to make over here is, even if you're not getting a direct question on triangulation, remember you can always bring in triangulation. Almost always bring in triangulation towards the end of your answer. It's more like adding Hershey's got syrup on top of your cake, right? And then if you're adding positivism and interpretivism, that's like a cherry on the top, right? These are the things that can make these concepts, these ideas, if and when included in your answers the right way, you can add up value to your answer. Your answer goes at least a level up, right? If you've scored level 4, you can take your answer to level 5 by this. Or if it's level 3, you can take it to level 4 by this, right? Now, let me give you a brief little idea about what positivism and interpretivism is, right? We talk about this in detail in the next class. When we talk about positivism, this idea was initiated by Auguste Comte. No, let me, I mean, that's correct, but let me keep it simple. When we talk about positivism, what you have to keep in mind for now is positivists support the idea of using quantitative data. Quantitative data. Write it down. They support using quantitative data, and quantitative data is numeric data. However, interpretivists, they support the idea of using qualitative data. Qualitative data. Yeah, write this down if you haven't as yet, and keep this in mind. This is going to help us ahead, right? Now, rather than approaching research methods from the perspective of a design problem, right? Positivists, when you're talking about testing a hypothesis, as compared to interpretivists when they're more inclined towards answering a research question, what we're saying over here is, as we bring in the idea of methodological pluralism and triangulation, why not just use them both? Why is it that one would want to very religiously be using one particular type of data collection and not the other? There's this one more, I hope you're all done writing this right now. This is one more tiny little thing that I like bringing in over here that makes a lot of sense, right? We spoke about methodological pluralism, and I think by now everyone does have an idea what methodological pluralism is. Plural, more than one, right? In contrast to this, there's this another fancy term, methodological purism. And I think if you compare pluralism with purism, this makes a lot of sense. The idea behind methodological purism is you being very strict about using one particular research collection method, data collecting method. Yeah, data collecting method. Get it? Methodological pluralism का opposite है methodological purism, right? So positivists very purely are inclined towards collecting the data through quantitative methods. On the other hand, interpretivists, they are pure. They're pure supporters of qualitative data, using qualitative methods. Yeah, so we're talking about methodological perspective. Now, when we talk about using the methodological perspective, the idea over here is as to how we collect our data. When we're collecting our data, what should be kept in mind is the highest possible levels. I mean, we should be collecting our data in a manner that we should try our level best that our data is high in terms of reliability and is also high in terms of validity too, regardless of the methods or data types being used, right? What the aim over here should be, that the research should be reliable to whatever level and extent you can make it reliable, and valid to the extent you can make it valid, right? Regardless of you using one method, two method, or more than two methods, right? So keeping it in a simplistic manner, this is what I had said earlier: methodological pluralism is the idea, and triangulation is when that idea is put to practice, or is it when it is put to use. Moving on towards what triangulation is. Triangulation, if methodological pluralism represents the theoretical argument for using mixed methods, triangulation is the means through which this theory is put into practice. That makes it very clear. It refers to the various ways in which a researcher can attempt to improve research validity and reliability. Now, these three key terms everyone should keep in mind. What I had said about positivism for now was they support quantitative data. Interpretivists, on the other hand, support qualitative data, right? Now, moving on. Methodological triangulation involves the use of two or more research methods. Norman Denzin in 1970 suggests that this allows the researcher to offset the weaknesses of one method with the strengths of another. Like I've been saying, to be able to compensate the flaws that are there in one methods by using the strengths of another. For example, a general weakness of questionnaire is that a researcher must assume that a respondent is telling the truth, which you cannot really be sure of, which you cannot really guarantee, right? Likewise, a research could offset this by using an observation method such as participant observation to check that respondents actually do what they're saying they do. So, a flaw over here was taken care of by using another method, right? Alternatively, the researcher could compare the results from two different methods used on the same people, right? The researcher could compare the results from two different methods used on the same people, such as a semi structured interview and a focus group. If the conclusions drawn are broadly the same, this helps confirm the reliability and validity of the data, right? You're collecting data on the same people, on the same group, with two different research methods. Methodological triangulation can involve any combination of: number one, two or more researchers using the same research technique. For instance, it's, let's just say I'm a researcher, I'm collecting data through a questionnaire, and then I ask someone else to collect data through a questionnaire. Or if I'm a researcher, I'm observing a particular group, and then I have another researcher who's there observing the same group to see if our findings are similar or if our findings are same. The two or more researchers using the same research technique, one. Number two, the second combination, the second possibility: one researcher using two or more research techniques. In that case, it's me. I distribute questionnaires, I collect data through questionnaires, and then I make the same respondents sit for an interview. Or a better combination would be I collect data from there through questionnaires, and then I observe their behavior to see if they're actually doing what they're claiming they're doing. We get this right? Or we get this right?
Yes, sir.
All right. The third combination: two or more researchers using two or more research techniques. For instance, it's me and it's Mr. XYZ with me. I collect data through a questionnaire, and I request Mr. XYZ to collect data through an observation. And then we compare our findings to see if the findings have similarity. Now, like I said, methodological triangulation can involve a range of combinations. Here are a few examples of them. Moving on. Researcher triangulation can be used in studies that rely heavily on researchers' interpretation. Now, what exactly is researcher triangulation? Now, before we get started with researcher triangulation, we let me tell you, we'd also talk about data triangulation, and for now we'd compare them both, right? We compare researcher triangulation with data triangulation. With researcher triangulation. Now, how is researcher triangulation, like I said, different from data triangulation? There are some data collection methods, there are some researchers where the researcher's interpretation matters a lot, right? Researcher किस चीज़ को किसी भी चीज़ को किस तरीके से इंटरप्रेट कर रहा है. For instance, if we're talking about collecting data through an observation and I'm the researcher, I am a human being who can be biased. I belong to a particular socioeconomic status, a particular gender, age group, ethnicity, so on and so forth, right? So the way I see something can be biased. And if we're talking about collecting data through an observational method, it can include biasness from my end, which would be wrong. Though researcher triangulation can be used in studies that rely heavily on researchers' interpretation to generate data. If different researchers using the same research method arrive at the same results, this can confirm the reliability of the data. Different researchers using the same research method arrive at the same results. Someone who does not belong to my ethnicity, comes from a different age bracket, a different gender, if I'm collecting data and so is that someone, and if our findings turn out to be the same, we can be more sure that our findings are closer to reality. Or alternatively, using researchers from different ethnic, age, gender, and class group can all help check for factors such as observer and interviewer bias. Now, this observer and interviewer bias, I hope everyone gets this. Observer bias, I give you an example. Interview bias, when you're interviewing someone, you as a person can end up affecting the responses that you get, right?
Yes, sir.
I mean, the respondent can feel intimidated by your presence, by your social class, by your ethnicity, by your gender, by your age, by your body language, your facial expressions, your demeanor, so on and so forth, right? So, moving on, this is what it was when we spoke about researcher triangulation. Moving on towards data triangulation now. When you talk about data triangulation involves gathering information through different sampling strategies, right? You're using different sampling strategies to be able to collect data, such as collecting data at different times, in different contexts, and from different people, right? So when you talk about using different sampling strategies, an example of this could be you collecting data at different times, you collecting data in different contexts, or probably from different people. This can be extended to include gathering data from both the individuals involved in a particular situation and the researcher's own experience in the situation. There you go, Venkatesh, again, my favorite. The study that was conducted by Venkatesh, I'm assuming everyone by now does remember, or if even if you don't, you could go to YouTube, type Venkatesh gang leader for a day, and you'd come across a few videos that would give you a very good idea about what this study was all about. Now, this gentleman Venkatesh he wanted to collect data on a criminal gang from Chicago. He ended up spending 7.5 years. Not only was he observing what was happening around him, but he was experiencing it on his own as well. He stayed with them for so long. Venkatesh, for example, was able to make sense of certain forms of behavior such as drug dealing and experiences such as being black and poor in ways that would not have been possible if he had not been intimately involved in the world he was studying. He had to show that involvement. He had to be a part of that group to be able to have to be able to have an explicit idea as to what it was like being black, being poor, being a member of a criminal gang. Right? Now, moving on, he gathered data from both those who were involved and from his own experience of living in their world. To illustrate these example ideas, we can point to a variety of sociological research that has used methodological triangulation to good effect. Now we are moving on towards discussing a couple of examples. A typical frequently asked question is, sir, do we need to learn all of them? No, you don't. You don't. I mean, if you learn them, it's a good thing. But if you do not know them, it is okay. I mean, of course, knowing them is better. The more the merrier, the more references you can give that are directly in line with the requirement and the wordings of the question, the better it is. Now, Eileen Barker, we're talking about examples of triangulation here. Eileen Barker in 1984 used participant observation, questionnaire, and semi structured interviews in a research on the Unification Church, the Moonies. For the ones who do not know who Moonies are, it's worth Googling, right? Google Moonies. For the ones who are studying A2, you do have an idea about them. I have mentioned them while doing religion. The Unification Church, Moonies, it's a religious sect, if I may call it. And what Eileen Barker did was, Eileen Barker did not rely on a single data collection method. Eileen Barker collected data through overt participant observation, through questionnaires, and through semi structured interviews. Right? Likewise, Hay in 1997 studied girls' friendships in two London schools using a combination of participant observation and personal documentation. Some of the girls allowed her to read their diaries, and she was also given access to the notes that girls passed between themselves in the classroom. Now, again, over here, we're talking about a combination of this and this being used by this to be able to collect data. These are examples of triangulation, real examples of more than one data collection method being used by sociologists when conducting their researches. Moving on. Methodological pluralism and triangulation are therefore frequently employed by sociologists because they improve reliability and validity. I think by now this should be clear, right? Using different methods and sampling strategies, a researcher can generally improve overall the reliability of a research approach and the validity of the data collected. More specifically, data collected using higher reliability methods such as questionnaires can offset the weaknesses of observational methods. The reverse applies to validity. This can be linked to what we started off with, right? तो एक मेथड का फ्लॉ है, दूसरे मेथड के स्ट्रेंथ से आप उस फ्लॉ को कंपनसेट कर सकते हो, उसको ऑफसेट कर सकते हो, उसको ओवरकम कर सकते हैं, राइट? मूविंग ऑन. Arguments in favor of methodological pluralism and triangulation are convincing, but these techniques still have practical problems. Of course, there are practical problems. To put it in a simplistic manner, what is triangulation? Triangulation is using more than one methods. Using more than one methods to do what? To collect data. Of course, you're talking about doing something more than once. That requires more of effort. That requires more of money being spent. That requires more of resources being allocated. That requires more of time being available. All of these, they are practical problems that you do come across, right? So, talking in terms of these practical problems, triangulation adds another layer of time, effort, and expense to research in terms of things such as number one, the time needed to analyze different types of data created from a number of different methods. It's not only about collecting data from here, there, and everywhere. You need to sit, put things together, analyze them, and work your way through. Number two, the need to employ more researchers, manpower. You need more of people. You'd probably have to pay them as well. All of this does have an impact, right? All of these are practical problems that might emerge. Number three, the general coordination of much larger research project, right? If it's a large research project, you're collecting one form of data from here, another from here, another from here, another from here. All of that requires a lot of coordination too. And it's easier said than done. You need to put in a lot, just saying use more than one method, it's pretty convincing. It makes a lot of sense. But then putting it to practice, actually doing what Norman Denzin wants you to do is something that requires a lot of effort, right? Now, in addition, collecting and comparing different types of data can be complicated too. This is a nice one here. Let me repeat. In addition, collecting and comparing different types of data can be complicated. How is it that collecting and comparing different type of data can be complicated? Such data may not always be easily and neatly compared. Why so? What if I'm collecting data and there's this Mr. X that we've been talking about is collecting data. The idea is to see if my data collection, if the findings I have are similar to the data that has been collected by Mr. X. If they're similar, yay, amazing. What if they're not? If using more than one methods, one of the researchers comes up with a particular finding and the other comes up with another, what would you do then? Who would you trust? That would turn it into a whole lot of khichdi, which would require you to put in a lot more of effort now to probably recollect data. You cannot really be sure or certain. Who can you trust and whom you wouldn't trust. अगर दोनों डेटा सेम है तो आप कहते हो अच्छी बात है, लेकिन अगर दोनों डेटा सेम नहीं आए, if you still don't get this, if there's this bundle of notes you have, your father's counted it and then your father's asked you to count it, if your count was the same, amazing. If the count wasn't the same, don't you think you'd have to redo the entire process? And we're not talking about counting notes from a bundle. We're talking about a proper research being conducted, right? Though such data may not always be easily and neatly compared. Where a researcher gets contradicting data from two different sources, it can be difficult to distinguish true from false. If the researcher receives two opposing accounts of the same thing, which account is true? And more importantly, how can the researcher tell, or in other words, how on earth do you think the researcher would be able to figure out दोनों डेटा में से या दो से ज़्यादा डेटा हैं तो तीनों डेटा में से, चारों डेटा में से कौन सा डेटा सही है और कौन सा डेटा सही नहीं है? We all get this, right?
Yes, sir.
Everyone?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, since we have no questions, let's wrap it up over here. Take good care of yourselves. Stay happy, healthy, safe, and protected. Stay humble, spread positivity, spread smiles, and Allah Hafiz.
Thank you, sir. Allah Hafiz.
Allah Hafiz, beta.
Love, sir.
Allah Hafiz.